2013 saw the rise in media reporting of what is often labelled Muslim extremism. In fact, perpetrators of this violence are more accurately referred to as Takfiris. These individuals are denounced by all mainstream Muslims, in Syria, in Britain and around the world. But there are stark examples of a difference in the media's treatment of Muslims and non-Muslims in the UK. On the 22nd of May 2013, an off-duty soldier, Private Lee Rigby, was killed near his Woolwich barracks. 2 men were convicted of his murder, their Muslim connections receiving heavy emphasis. Then, a month later, on the 29th of April, a foreign national called Pavlo Lapshyn stabbed Mohammed Saleem, a Muslim, in Small Heath, Birmingham. Lapshyn admitted murder and plotting explosions near mosques in Walsall, Tipton and Wolverhampton, but his confessions received little coverage. 2 murders just weeks apart, one making continuous front-page news, the other little more than a fleeting media story. Why the difference? Why did so many hear of Private Lee Rigby's murder? How many even know the name of the murdered Muslim? Is it due to British media discrimination? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. We began by asking, what do people know of Lee Rigby's murder? Where he was killed, how, why, by whom, and what's happened since?
What do you know about the murder of Lee Rigby, by which I mean where he was killed, how, why, by whom, and what's happened since?
At Greenwich, he was killed just outside the barracks when he had a T-shirt with Help for Heroes on it. He was off duty, and he was murdered by 2 people, the names of which I can't remember, but they're very similar, like Abakatawa or something like that. And they've just recently been tried and convicted. I don't think they've yet been sentenced.
From what I understand from the news, he was butchered in the street around Woolwich.
It was a UK soldier targeted because he was in the armed services, and it was domestic terrorism. But it was Islamic terrorists.
What do you know about the murder of Lee Rigby, where he was killed, how, why, by whom, or what happened since?
What I know is that he was murdered in the street, basically, by terrorists. Pretty much, fundamentally, if you break it down, what it was a man attacked and murdered in a busy street in London.
From what I've heard in the news, such as the BBC and ITV, I've seen that Lee Rigby was the soldier in Woolwich. What I've seen is that he was killed by 2 Islamist extremists, but other than that, I don't know anything into the actual story. Just what I've been told on the news and how he died, but other than that, then I can't say I have any other knowledge.
It was a terrorist attack, wasn't it? It was terrorist motivated in Woolwich, wasn't it? In Royal Woolwich. Terrible incident.
So, a widespread knowledge of Private Rigby's murder and the circumstances surrounding it. We asked our experts for the full facts.
Lee Rigby was a soldier based in the UK, in a UK barracks in London, in Woolwich. He was killed by 2 assailants in the summer of 2013. The 2 assailants were Muslims. They professed themselves to be so at the scene of the killing, and were videoed on people's phone cameras saying that they had killed Lee Rigby, not only killed him, but in fact dismembered his body as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth in retaliation for killings of Muslims in Iraq and Afghanistan.
The murder of the soldier Lee Rigby was perpetrated by 2 youths who had a history of activism, both within calling to Islam in England and Islam for the Muslim world. And I believe that because of the Muslim attachment they had to their fellow Muslims from other countries, especially countries which were being attacked by the foreign policy of Britain, they felt angry about this, they felt upset about this, to the point where they unfortunately believed they could take the law into their own hands and enact some kind of revenge or justice. The thing is that their attack was not in the name of a religion per se, to say that we must kill disbelievers because they're disbelievers. They never said this. Their motives were political, which is basically that they have an issue against the foreign policy of Britain, which goes to other countries which have never attacked Britain, countries which have never threatened to attack Britain, and basically employ bombs, ordnance, guns and so on and so forth, which kills women and children, which kills civilians.
We continued by asking the same questions about the killing of Mr. Saleem. We asked, what do you know of Mohammed Saleem's murder? Where he was killed, how, why, by whom, and again, what's happened since.
The same question about a different murder, the murder of a man called Mohammed Saleem. Do you know anything about where he was killed, how, why, by whom, or what's happened since?
No, I'm very sorry. No. If I'm completely honest, I haven't heard anything of the murder of Mohammed Saleem.
No, not coming to mind, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'm not too sure who he is.
No, I'm afraid I don't know much about this one.
No.
Nothing, I'm afraid.
Oh, wait, I can't remember, sorry, no. I can't remember.
No, I couldn't tell you on that one, I couldn't.
Now, same question again about a different murder.
Right.
What, if anything, do you know about the murder of Mohammed Saleem? Again, where he was killed, how, why, by whom, what's happened since?
No, sorry. Don't know the name, sorry.
I haven't actually heard anything about that.
Nope, don't know anything, never heard of him.
I haven't heard about that.
No, I know nothing about Mohammed Saleem, but then I don't know how much it was broadcast on British media.
Is that the old man, around 78 years old? Yeah, he was killed by, I think I've read about that. He was killed by some, again, extreme rightists from the other side. They stabbed him with a very long knife, which went, I think, probably from the back of his backside and went all the way through.
So, much less knowledge of the death of Mr. Saleem. What were the facts of the case?
Mohammed Saleem was an elderly Muslim gentleman based in Birmingham, in the United Kingdom. He was killed in the summer of 2013. In fact, a couple of weeks before the murder of the soldier Lee Rigby. His murder was quite brutal. He was stabbed quite viciously. Police and forensic evidence say that the knife wounds went right through from his back to the front. He was killed in a hate crime, even though sadly at the time of his killing it was not reported as such. It later transpired through investigation that the person who killed him was motivated by anti-Muslim hatred. His killing went largely unnoticed in the British media, and it's a salutary warning actually as to how we really look at the issue of political and hate-motivated violence.
The murder of Mohammed Saleem was perpetrated by a Ukrainian student which came to the UK, and apparently this occurred in Birmingham, and apparently this was done based on the Ukrainians' attested belief that, you know, they were not white and non-white people should be killed. But when the police investigated, obviously this person, they discovered he had extremist literature. This person had also was also pleaded, guilty to terrorism charges and preparing for acts of terrorism, including bomb-making equipment, which was found in his premises. But even though he stabbed an individual, and even though he actually has bomb-making equipment, there is no nationwide campaign against racial or nationalistic extremism, but rather there's only a campaign against what they'd call Islamic extremism.
Both were innocent victims, killed in the UK with blades within a few weeks of each other. However, the non-Muslim victim is well known, but the Muslim victim is not. We invited the public to comment on the reasons they thought this was the case.
Both individuals were killed in the United Kingdom within a few weeks of each other with blades. One, that's Lee Rigby, the non-Muslim, was a soldier in Woolwich barracks, and on the whole he received a lot of coverage. The other, the Muslim victim, Mohammed Saleem, received almost no coverage at all. Why do you think that might have been?
Probably sort of indicative of Western attitudes towards people who are non-white.
I'm not too sure. It could be because of the amount of TV coverage.
It's because mostly if you see the media is slightly moving towards, the whole of Europe is slightly moving towards the right, and certain extreme right elements are getting more powerful in all over Europe, especially Northern Europe. And the trend, you also see the trend here. So just to get some extra votes, they do it.
Perhaps there's prejudice. I mean, we live in a multiracial society now, and I do feel, whether it's agreed or not, that there is a lot of resentment to it, and therefore perhaps it's taken up one step further. The people that are reporting on these sort of things, these sort of crimes, possibly feel the same way as well, or understand how we feel.
Is there an objective explanation for the difference in profile of the two murders? Our experts explain.
There are a lot of similarities and differences with the cases of Mohammed Saleem and Lee Rigby. I think one of the most sad parts of the reportage of these is the sort of conflation of the idea that these are similar crimes, that, you know, they're motivated by prejudice. Clearly Mohammed Saleem's was. I think there is an argument to be made that the killing of Lee Rigby was a political crime. As much as we condemn it and we find particularly the way he was murdered to be heinous, I think we have to accept that one was a straightforward hate crime, that is the killing of Mohammed Saleem, and the other was a very confused motivational act, a political act. Again, not something we condone, but there is a difference here that we have to start understanding in the way violence and criminality is playing out in the United Kingdom. One of the saddest things I find is the fact that we still have to struggle to explain Mohammed Saleem's case. It is a shocking case that an elderly man can be brutally murdered in this way and not really get any attention.
I think it says quite a lot about the UK government, about the media, in that a person who was killed for reasons of prejudice and anger and hatred, a soldier, Lee Rigby, is kind of portrayed as a martyr. He's portrayed as a great Briton, a great British citizen. But in the other case of Mohammed Saleem, who was also a British citizen, who also was law-abiding and also contributed to the British society, not much was known about him. We just have a face, we have his age, and that's it. Not really much more than that.
A Cardiff University study has shown that for every one nice Muslim story that British newspapers choose to publish, they also choose 17 evil Muslim news stories. We wondered what the public thought that would do to society over a period of time.
Cardiff University study has shown that for every one nice Muslim story that the British newspapers choose to publish, they also choose 17 evil Muslim news stories. What do you think that does to society over time?
It poisons people. It gives people a perception that we're under siege, almost.
Well, I think it's shocking. I think the press has huge power in this respect, and a lot of people are becoming prejudiced against Muslims in complete ignorance, living in neighbourhoods where they might never meet a Muslim. They're still developing this prejudice through their reading of the press, and it's extremely divisive. And yeah, I don't know what we can do to change it. The press is so powerful, but it should be changed.
It makes people against Muslim people. Where I live, we've got a large mixed community, and there's a lot of Muslim people there, and they're all lovely, and yeah, so I suppose, but when you hear it in the press all the time, it does influence people. People can be very small-minded, but it's you know, if you just get to know people, it doesn't really matter what religion they are. It annoys me.
I think that changes the views of society. I think that being a Muslim myself, I know a lot of Muslims who are very nice people who would always help people. The whole point of Islam is to help others to be the best person that you possibly can be. So if the British media are portraying Muslims as bad people, then in the long run, people's perceptions are going to change. The media has such a big influence over how people think and how people act that eventually they can turn people away from being friendly towards Muslims to the point where they're in fact quite hostile.
What is the professional opinion about the impact on society of this differential reporting? Our experts had strong views.
At IHRC, we've done a lot of research about how negative political and media discourses impact people. And one of the arguments we actually make is that although obviously, for example, Muslims or other racialized minorities are the victims of demonized discourse of hate crimes and so on, in fact, even people, ordinary everyday people who perpetrate hate crimes are in a way also victims of that discourse, because what you'll often find is that attacks against people are usually committed not by organized groups or, you know, the far right and so on and so forth, but by people you would say are your normal, average, everyday citizens, and their motivation often boils down to the fact that they feel really provoked by what they've heard to take some sort of action. Now, when you have continuous media demonization, it's not really going to be very surprising if ordinary people start believing what they hear.
Next, we asked whether the public felt the media demonized Muslim communities, and if so, whether this treatment of Muslims in the British media affected either their perception or other people's perceptions of Muslim communities.
Do you think the British media demonised the Muslim community, and has that affected your perception of Muslims?
The first part, absolutely. I think British media have a culture to sort of demonise anyone who isn't a white heterosexual male. It hasn't really affected my opinion. If anything, it kind of makes me more active to go out and then sort of learn something different or try and research for myself, make my own opinions. But I'm quite jaded about the media, so I don't know if that really reflects a great many people's answers. I'm sure it does have a really negative effect on the whole.
Well, I'll give you one example. Wherever I work, we literally have to answer my colleagues we've been working with for years. They would first of all ask us why this is happening and why Muslims are behaving like that. And we have to literally explain it to them that, look at it, that 99.99% Muslims, they don't behave like that. They're very peaceful and they're very down-to-earth people, and they don't get involved into, even a few years back, they were blamed that they're not involved into local politics even. So they just keep a low profile and they don't want to get involved. They just work hard and that's it.
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, the word Muslim is scattered all over the newspapers. It's a real buzzword with a negative sense, and so there definitely is a deliberate portrayal of Muslims as bad.
What does the research suggest about the impact on the Muslim image in the United Kingdom?
Well, our specialisation and the work that I've worked on obviously focuses on the demonisation of Muslims, and I think there's a case to be made that really Muslims are the most demonised community in the United Kingdom. Having said that, however, I think we have to look at this in the context of how, first of all, we had made colour racism, quote-unquote, taboo, and yet Islamophobia sort of remained as a kind of acceptable form of racism, and I do feel that off of the back of that we now have the resurgence of old forms of racism. So you are now getting anti-black racism once more resurging in the media. We're having a lot of increased demonisation of migrants, of asylum seekers, refugees, of new migrants, people who have got a perfect right to be in this country, who are coming to the United Kingdom, like Romanians and Bulgarians this year, are already being demonised. And we shouldn't also forget groups like the Roma, who are terribly, terribly demonised in the media. So yes, Muslims suffer a lot, but they're not the only ones.
Currently, I think the most obvious community which is being demonised the most in the UK is the Muslim community. For many reasons which are recurrent through European history. In most of the cases, it's just a community that has different practices, different values which are different from what has been deemed to be the mainstream set of values in the society. And if you constantly hear negative stories about any minority, the general majority will believe those stories.
It's said bad news sells. We invited public comment on how much responsibility the British media must take for influencing community relations.
There's a popular expression, which I'm sure you've heard, namely, bad news sells.
Yes.
How responsible would you say the British media is with its interest in bad news in affecting community relations?
I think it is very responsible, and particularly some newspapers. I believe they very badly treat some minorities, and I think an example at the moment is Romanians and Bulgarians. I think it's absolutely appalling what they're doing.
I'm not too sure, really, to say on that one. I think, I don't know, from my point of view, I just watch any news. I think, you know, if it's bad news, I think it's in the public interest to, you know, present that bad news and any data around that.
I think this is a tendency you can see all over Europe, that media is no better than the rest of us, really. We tend to choose the stories that reinforce the attitudes, the impressions we already have. But I think that media has a responsibility, and a very serious responsibility, to produce a balanced picture of what is going on.
Well, I think you're right, bad news does sell, and it's an awful thing to say, but they're all businesses, they've got to sell newspapers, they've got to make money, so they're going to go where the money is. I think depending on your community, my community, it doesn't affect us. People get to know each other, we've got good interfaith relations, our local councillors help, so and I think that all helps to make a strong community, because it doesn't really matter where, you know, what religion, where you're from, your friends and neighbours at the end of the day, you're all striving for the best for your local community. If you can work together, then that's the main thing.
We turn for final comment to our experts about the relationship between the treatment of Muslims in the British media and community relations.
I think the British media is quite notorious when it comes to community relations and creating and spreading prejudice, and this is not something that's unacknowledged. You can see how we've had a shift in attitude in society in my lifetime on many issues, including, for example, the issue of sexuality. This wouldn't really have gone from one extreme to the other if there hadn't been a kind of focused, positive attempt by the media to redefine its depiction of people with other sexualities. Now, when we can acknowledge the impact of the media in that way, and then we know that they demonise deliberately or just because of the way they institutionalised many groups, including Muslims, then it's inevitable, really, that they demonise Muslims to an extent that affects them extremely negatively. It's very all well and good saying bad news sells, but you know, the media isn't always driven by that.
Unfortunately, you know, Britain is a capitalist society like many other Western countries, and in capitalism, the only morality is, in a way, what sells, what, you know, your profit is profit. So they chase profit, and if profit is in sensationalism, if profit is in generating strong emotions, which is psychologically proven to sell more, you know, generate strong emotions. That's why they use sex, or they use anger or hatred or things that bring people into outrage. They see that it sells, and so they will employ this. And in a way, the media are a lot to blame for the demonization of minority communities historically throughout Europe. But not only the media, I would also say that the politicians who conveniently use the media and in some ways influence the media, because there is a reciprocity between the media and politicians, that they use the media to get powers to use against political dissent within the Muslim community. That's where tyranny begins, that's where oppression begins, that's where persecution begins.
The murder of British soldier Private Lee Rigby received blanket media coverage, while the murder of Muslim Mohammed Saleem received hardly any attention at all. The difference seems to stem from an inbuilt media bias towards reporting the murder of a British national by self-proclaimed Muslims and against reporting the murder of a Muslim by a non-Muslim foreign national. So, from our investigation, Britain tolerates different levels of reporting for stories involving attacks on Muslims versus attacks against non-Muslims in similar circumstances. If this is indeed the case, then to achieve true equality of treatment for Muslims in the British media, it seems that the United Kingdom has a long way to go.